Welcome back to episode 15 of Medieval. What's on your workbench? Welcome back, everybody. I'm sure you've noticed a small difference on my side of things, but start with the introductions before we get to your burning questions. I'm Andrew with craftybeetroot.com. We have Chili from WOYWBE Solutions. And today we're going to talk about what's on your workbench. Chili, how you been?
I've been just fantastic. How about you?
Very tired and a little bit disappointed.
I imagine so. After all that hard work to have the Medieval Fest canceled, That is a massive bummer.
Yeah, so for most of you that have been playing along, you've known that I've been sailing towards my first ever medieval festival, and like most things, the first time I do something, I like to try and do it properly. And yeah, so a few sleepless nights, and due to good old COVID-19, we've had a bit of an outbreak down here in Australia, and it's shut everything down. Fortunately, it's only been, I think we'll find out today, but it's only meant to be like a 3-day lockdown, which is very good. But the 3 days could have been pretty well anywhere else, and it would have been slightly better. But yeah, so how are you doing, Allwood? Oh, Chili.
We're just trucking along, kind of keeping an eye on COVID stuff here. We had just finally kind of gotten back opened up, and now there's questions again about what we're gonna have to do. So who knows?
Oh well, doesn't matter.
No,
it seems to be going somewhere, but yeah, rather than having this be too time-based, now we've locked this in time. You can tell I just woke up and it's like, oh, okay. It's only 6 o'clock, like I should be fine. But so, Chili, let's just jump into it. What's on your workbench?
Well, I want to talk a little bit about something that I just took off my workbench, actually. And unfortunately, that means I don't have it here to show everybody in YouTube land. But I had a really quick little project that I had to find a solution for. We have a local theater here in Longmont, Colorado. And they just received this really awesome gift of a incredibly nice Bluthner piano, grand piano, for the theater, and then they wanted to keep it kind of safe and protect it, so they had somebody build kind of a little like cabinet cage thing for it on the side of the stage. So it's a really odd shaped what would that be? Pentagon. To think, jeez. And two of the sides open up on it to really give a big enough space for that piano to come out. And the problem they found was that the box was made really nicely. It's all like 1-inch square tube and covered in a wood skin. It's awesome. But the corner where the doors meet, there was no support there. There's no vertical support right there.
Yep.
So one, the doors can close like further than they need to. You could swing in and hit the piano with a door. And two, that top piece would kind of squish down a bit if somebody leaned on it, or jumped up there or something. It really messed stuff up. So they needed a vertical piece to go in there. And one of my friends is involved with the theater over there, and he said something about it, about finding a welder to do it. And I was like, well, I've got like square stock and plate steel right here and a welder. You want me to make something? So it was kind of interesting because it's a weird space. It's not a 90-degree angle. That point where those corners come together is like a 135-degree angle. And then inside of it, there's metal structure that is in the way near that corner. So I ended up going over and laying on the floor for a bit, and I used some cardboard pieces to just kind of cut up and template the shape that needs to fit up on the underside of the top of that. The bottom is just the stage, so it's just flat, no big deal. So what I did is I took some cardboard, I templated that shape so that I knew what I could build for a base and a top. And I built the base and top the same. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And basically welded those on, to the end of a piece of square tube. And then I wanted it to be universal. I didn't want people to have to worry about what side's up and what side's down. So I made the two plates identical, but opposed.
Yep.
So no matter which way you flip it, you'll fit the weird corners at the top. So, two plates that are sandwiching a square tube that's like 40 inches long. And that's all well and good. That stops it from squishing down, but it doesn't really help with the doors. If you just set that in there and you go to close the door, well, you could knock that into the piano, which would be horrible. We don't want that. Yeah. So I had to think of a way to lock it in place. And obviously the stage floor, like it's not plausible to like bolt through that really, unless you inset, if you put an inset thread in the floor. Well, that's a pain in the butt. So how could I lock this thing in place, but make it easy to get in and out? So what I ended up doing was I took some angle iron and I cut some thin strips of angle iron out and I welded them to the vertical post so that with the top and bottom plates, it created a U shape or a C shape.
Yep.
And I drilled through those to make a hole that goes all the way through both plates in line. And I went and got some trailer hitch pins.
Yep.
Which, if you're not familiar, those are a straight pin, but one end has a head on it, like a flat head. And then through that flat head is drilled a hole so that you can put a ring through it to be able to pull it out of the hitch.
Yep.
So I got two of those and some springs, some compression springs. And then put those through the holes with the spring, welded washers onto the pins. So I had spring-loaded latches. So it was one of those, it was kind of one of those, mother of necessity, necessity is the mother of all invention kind of moments, where it's like, it needed to be fairly simple. I'm not going to go bananas on this, creating something super intricate, but I wanted it to be really functional for a long time and easy to function. So just I built it all out of scraps that I had around the shop with the, I think the only things I bought were the pins and the compression springs. That was it. Because I oddly didn't have any of those just laying around.
Oh, that's awesome. It seems like a bit of an oversight for the original designer to at least I can understand. I mean, I've made plenty of things where you make the door shut and you kind of forget you need to lift up what the door's shutting on, and it'll, you can't get it. You've got to like lift it up, shut it on. I can kind of see them making that error, but not having a stop plate or something is a bit, that one I was a bit surprised at, because
I think it was one of those instances of the guy's a really good welder.
Yeah.
Like while I was crawling on the floor, I was inspecting welds and stuff. I'm like, this guy did a great job. But it's a really big difference between a designing craft worker and a craft worker.
A fabricator.
There's being able to do the work is one thing, but being able to do the work in your head before you ever touch a tool is a whole other ball of wax. You have to have a different kind of insanity for that. And I think it's just one of those things that, he's probably really used to building, cubes and squares, rectangles, boxes, and didn't really think, oh, wait, I have a really obtuse angle here where these doors are coming together. How is this going to function?
Yeah, and there's no vertical structure. Like if you're building anything, you'll just put a vertical structure right where that door is, and
Yeah.
go from there. That's super interesting. Yeah. How did you? I assume you had to take the piano out to be able to weld on it, and did you have to like protect the wood and stuff, or how did you even go about welding on it?
What I did was I went over with my cardboard and scissors and, tape measure, pen and pencil, or a pencil and paper. And I drew the whole thing out sitting there,
Yep.
taking measurements, making my templates. And I built the whole thing on paper first.
Yep.
So that I knew exactly what I needed to do. It took about 17 more measurements than I actually needed, which is good.
Yep.
I'd rather have too much information than too little. Then just came back to my shop, cut out the pieces and burned a little wire. Took probably an hour
Yep.
to put it together and shoot with some spray paint. All I had was engine enamel, Chevy orange. I was like, well, it'll be visible. Nobody's going to miss it at least.
Yeah. I mean, it's all hidden by the door anyway, so it's.
Yeah. So it was super simple. And it was just like I like it. I took it over. It slid right in. All I had to do was punch my holes in the floor and the top of the cabinet for the pins to slide into.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was in.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, it's one of those things where you've got the school and you've got the tools and you've got the materials and you've got the skills. It's just like it's nice when you can just be like, hey, I'll just fix that up and whack that together and off you go.
Those are great projects for clearing random crap out of your shop.
Yeah, it's always like I can justify having all this random stuff because I used it on this last project, so therefore I need to go get more random stuff. My concern
longer.
Yeah, my concern is most of my projects, well, not on fabric projects, we'll talk about that, but on my other projects, I use up all my scrap, and then I'm like, I have to go buy some wood just so I've got scrap lying around.
Yeah,
I do run out of like some of my core basic, like thin ply or even thin MDF and stuff like that, where you just kind of randomly use it on a bunch of different stuff, and then suddenly you're like, oh, I'm out of my scrap project, so I need to go get some more scrap wood.
I need to overbuy for another project.
Yeah, exactly. I built those drawers for my sons last year, and when I bought it, I was like not 100% sure about what thickness plies I was going to use, so I basically overbought on my like thin ply, so I had basically double of each, so I could kind of pick and choose. I ended up splitting between like the sides and the top what thicknesses I used, and so I've got a bunch of stuff left over, but I'm starting to kind of run out of that, and it's like, that was really good cheap, because I went to like a proper plywood supplier and I bought a 6x12 sheet or something. Like, it was a pretty decent sheet that I needed to actually have in a trailer to get home. But yeah, it was awesome. Lasted forever. It would have been like a 4x8. Must have been a 4x8. That sounds like a set. It filled the trailer. I was like, how big was that trailer? It wasn't 12. Yeah, it must have been 4x8. That sounds better.
E-goods will generally come in either 4x8, or a lot of times cabinet grade ply is 5x5.
Yeah, no, this was definitely 4x8, because I think it was like mainly for like lining, if you wanted to like do plywood lining in your house and stuff like that.
Yep.
Yeah, it was nice wood though. But
nice.
What you got there?
That was the real simple thing, and now what's actually on my workbench is my little trough here for flattening out large pieces of timber, because I'm going to start working on this cribbage table. I've got actually my piece here that is going to be the top, which my computer is completely sitting on.
Yep.
But I've got to get that weird thing flattened out. So I've got my trough out for my router.
Okay.
Sits on the edges of my workbench, edges of my workbench sit right here, and it slides along the workbench as I run the router back and forth.
Oh, yep.
Over you surface plane the wood and get it nice and flat. So that's the next fun thing.
Nice. So you couldn't get that flat just using hand planes, or is it just quicker and easier to do it that way?
It will be a very, very long process. And the hard thing on this one, especially, is that it's not terribly long, and it has a bit of a warp to it.
Oh, yeah.
And so getting it to stay still as I'm hand planing is just a nightmare.
Too much.
It's no fun. Yeah. So I'm a little tight on time. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to use the sled and get that sucker flattened out.
Nice.
And I think I'm going to have to abandon my leg plans too, which is a bummer.
Oh, well.
But we'll figure out something else.
Yeah. We always do.
Yeah. So what, Andrew, what is on your work body?
So I couldn't resist. I had to put it on. So this is the top part of my costume, partially, that I was going to wear to Medieval Festival this year. So I wanted to talk a couple of things. I wasn't sure what to talk about because I was like, I don't want to talk about sewing. I'm sick of sewing. We've talked about it a few times. But basically, over the weekend, I put together pretty well my complete costume. And as part of that, I put together this tunic. So you can see some nice fabric buttons there on the video. And I'm wearing a hood, which I will take off because it's annoying me. There we go, much better. So yeah, so this was actually put together. I think I started this at 7 o'clock on Saturday night, and I think I almost finished it at 3 o'clock on Sunday morning. Pretty well. I think I had, what did I have left to do? I think I had some buttonholes left to do or something, and yeah, so that was a bit extreme. But what I wanted to talk a little bit about this week was working on the fittings of some of these costumes, which on this top, it was buttons, and these were fabric buttons. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about aglets, which are these little things. So we'll start with the buttons because this was the first time I've ever actually made fabric buttons. Previously, let me remove my camera too. I'm actually looking at you guys. Yeah, so I've made buttons in the past, historical buttons, I should probably say. It's I made Dorset buttons once for a this was for a captain's uniform. Oh, children are awake. And basically they're made traditionally with a Dorset ram. So you take the ram horn and you end up with like basically a pipe that basically ends up being a ring, and then you thread across it until you get basically a button, and the bulk of the button is made up with like a fabric thread, and you can make it really intricate. So I've made some of them in the past for a I guess it would be an Edwardian. It's basically like a 18th century shirt with like a button at the top and some buttons on the sleeves. But this time, going medieval, I wanted to make more appropriate buttons. And so a lot of the research that I'd done briefly wasn't definitely thoroughly researched, but you end up with either kind of like a pewter or a brass kind of button, typically, or a fabric button. Now, I don't have pewter or brass, and I did have a quick look in craft stores, and A, I didn't find any suitable buttons, and B, any suitable buttons would have been $1 a button, and when you need 20 of them or whatever, it's like, no, it's not worth it. So the pattern that I was following, or the YouTube video that I was following, which was a Morgan Donna video, if anybody's interested, she had these fabric buttons, and basically they end up being fabric balls, but they're really easy. They're cheap because you're just using the fabric, and they look quite good. And all you need to do is these are, I think, a 3-inch circle of fabric, and you sew around the edge, tighten it up, and it basically makes it kind of curve in on itself. And so you kind of get this like flat looking weird kind of cylinder, I guess you could call it. And then you sew around the edge again, and then you basically tuck it in again. And when you do it that second time, it converts it into a ball. And then you basically just sew the end up, and then you sew it to your fabric. And that is it. Like, you don't actually have to put like stuffing in there, that the actual circle itself is making that stuffing. And then to make different sizes, you just use smaller circles. So for my wife's costume, let me get that over here. We did smaller ones. So if you've got looking at the thing, you can kind of see the comparison.
Yes, your balls are much bigger than your wife's.
Yes, it's always a good thing, but she has more. Let's just be clear. She has 10 and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, but yeah, and so these were actually these are so simple that my wife ended up, like, I showed her once and she ended up making all the ones for her costume because I was running out of time. But yeah, and so they work really well, and then the buttonholes are made just as buttonholes. But yeah, I'm not sure how common this was in the medieval ages, but I can imagine it was very common. Most people think that buttons started off as like wooden toggles, and while I think they were present, I have a feeling that something like this, the use of fabric, was much more common. But yeah, so that was definitely a learning experience, and like anything, I love learning new little skills like this, because now that I have this, the next time I need to make costumes, especially in the medieval age, you know, I've got this kind of thing. And yeah, like these take probably maybe 10 minutes each to make. Takes longer to actually probably sew the buttonholes than it does to actually make the buttons. So that's the one type of enclosure that I used. The other type is eyelets. So eyelets, I think we talked a little bit about this last week, but on my wife's costume, there's a whole bunch of eyelets. And so eyelets are typically laced up, just like a corset would be with, you know, metal eyelets. So how that was laced up, you would think, oh, they just put lace through. Well, they do. They put a thread through, but they have at the end of it what's called an aglet. And it's a little brass, basically it looks like a brass needle. And you sew it's blunt at the end, but it's kind of pointy, but like rounded, so you're not like poking people. And you sew your cord to it, whatever you're going to use to actually lace up, but it allows you to thread through the eyelet. Now, previously, I've just I haven't worried about that particular side of things. I've made a corset before many years ago for my wife, obviously, and just I don't know why I had to clarify that, but yeah, and so I think I can't even remember. I think I just pre-laced it somehow and just called it good. But this one I wanted it to be a little bit more, because of the dress. It needs to basically be completely undone and then redone up. I wanted something that would make it a lot simpler. And I was like, how do they make these aglets? Because I was like, surely they're not that difficult to make. And so when I was watching the original video on using aglets and how to attach a thread, I was looking at going, that looks a little bit like some brass pipe. And so I've got some brass tubing, and I've found another website or another YouTube video, and they made it out of flat brass. I was like, oh, I think I've got something here. So what I ended up doing, and I decided to make 4, because you can never have too many aglets in life. And basically they're a cone. And I guess the best way, I'll describe it first, and then I'll kind of describe how I make it. But basically there's a cone that as it gets smaller towards the point, you know, you round it in on itself, and then at the end it's hollow. And then there's 2 holes drilled through it. So you can put the cord into the end of it, and then you sew it to it. I do have another one floating around somewhere. but it's not here right now. But yeah, and so this is the one that I've made for my wife, which I had to end up making really, really thin. So what I did is I don't have flat brass lying around, but I do have some brass tubing. So what I did is I cut off some lengths, just using a hacksaw, and then I used a Dremel, actually cut it lengthways. So the tube stock that I had was a little bit big, so I made it basically half the diameter, half the circumference. And then I just flattened it out just using a hammer. And then what I did is I used a Dremel with just a cutting wheel, and I cut it into more of a triangle shape. And then basically with some pliers and just a hammer, and I just kind of slowly worked it until I got it into a nice cone shape. So does that kind of work? The light's terrible, apologize. But, and once I, yeah, so there's a bit of a picture of it. And you can see the ends hollow.
Yeah.
And so what I then did is, after I kind of had it all roughly shaped out, I then just went over and sanded it. And I just kind of kept working it and working it and working it with the hammer, and then the pliers, and just kind of squeezing it until it was shut, until I had my aglets. So the problem I have is I don't have a fine drill. Well, I've got a fine drill bit, but my drill is a bit too, like me, it's all thumb fisted, and it doesn't actually go fine enough to hold the drill bit. So I had to, a couple of weeks ago, we were joking about having the hand drill. I actually ended up having to use that because that was the finest kind of jaws I had that could actually close in on this really fine drill bit to be able to drill the hole through. So that was probably the hardest part, was just trying to get that hand drill to get it so precise. But yeah, overall.
How did you hold it while you were drilling?
It was a clamp, and what did I have? I had a hole punch, I think, kind of sitting in the end, and I clamped that down to just kind of clamp it. It wasn't very well clamped, I will say that, but it was enough.
Really tricky.
Yeah, and fortunately, I mean, brass is really soft, so it kind of chewed through it pretty quick. But yeah, I don't know if you'll be able to see on that one. It's super fine. There's like a tiny hole there. But the problem I had is the eyelets I made were actually too fine. So I had to keep working it down and down and down and down until I had one that actually fit. But again, brass is fairly forgiving, and I could just kind of keep tapping on it. And I think I ended up using some, I was like, after I used my Dremel to cut it, I'm like, I've got some tin cutters, like they'll cut this just as easy, and it was like five times quicker. So I could go in and kind of trim it. And then you attach the cord or the thread or whatever. This is very authentic inner paracord for my medieval costume, which I ended up just melting into the end of it because I couldn't find my super glue. But then I've got another one where I actually did try and authentically thread it on. It's just with these eyelets that I made, they're so fine that any extra bulk, it just won't go through. But yeah, it was one of those. It was, again, my favorite kind of project where I have a problem, I find the solution, and the solution is go online and buy a packet of 20 of these. Well, I don't have the time for that. And I was like, oh, how hard can it be? And within about 20 minutes, I had 4 of these kind of roughed out, and some of them are pretty rough. But overall, like, you're not meant to see them anyway. They're meant to be more of you tuck them in once you're done with it. But yeah, it was actually quite a bit of fun. I've never really worked too much with brass, but it was an enjoyable experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you come across any videos of, I think you said you saw somebody, making them out of flat stock.
Yep.
Did they show the whole process in that video of what they do? Or?
So it was a 12-year-old video that had 20,000 views. So that probably shows the quality of the video it was. It was kind of a guy just sitting there manipulating it, going, yeah, this is what I'm doing, and then manipulating. And so it wasn't hugely informative it just kind of gave me the bare bones of, okay, oh well, as long as you start with a piece of brass and curl it around, you can get, that's pretty well all you need. So yeah, it wasn't great tutorial, but it was enough for me to just kind of confirm the idea that I had in my head. Because originally I was just going to take brass tubing and cut kind of like a wedge out of it and then fold it in more. But I ended up deciding I needed to make it flat and start from basically from scratch.
Yeah. So traditionally, in medieval times, who would have been making those eyelets or those aglets would have actually been a jeweler, uh, because they use scrap materials and fine jewelers' tools to do that. I actually got to see some being made when I was in eighth grade and I went to Spain. We went to the historic sword factory in Toledo, and they make and have for hundreds and hundreds of years. They make weaponry and jewelry. So, like, one of the most impressive thing was we walked through this room where this little old Spanish man is sitting at this desk, hunched over, and he's got a brooch in front of him on his workbench, and he's laying in a like a laced pattern, almost like a storm fence, like just that kind of grid with gold thread. I mean, it is super fine, but it's pure gold, and he's hand hammering this thing into place, which was just phenomenal. But then the next room, there was a lady making aglets with flat stock, and the smallest anvil I've ever seen in my life. I mean, this little tiny baby anvil and this little tiny hammer, and she's just working it around just like I would like a fender, for a car, something like that. Like just tiny little taps and just rolling it over. And then they took they were creating balls for the ends of them by just taking liquid metal, by smelting it down and creating just these little balls, and then heating the tip of the aglet and the ball right after it was formed, and just pushing them together and letting them cool, and the whole thing was formed. I mean, it was amazing, the micro scale that they were working on, with the tools you would expect to do metal work with, just on an incredibly small scale. It was really cool.
It's always fun looking at like model makers, because they're like, they've got the same tools like circular saws, but they're like tiny because that's what they're cutting. And it's like, yeah, it's always cool when you see those real miniature tools. And I was definitely searching around my workshop going, where's my small hammers, and where's my, I was like, because I was just doing it on my wooden bench just to kind of, because I didn't want it to be too rough, and I was at night as well, and I didn't want it to be too loud. And I ended up moving across to some of my clamps, my wood desk bench clamps, and just kind of working on the edge of it where there was a little bit of metal. But yeah, so that was a good fun little project. And now I've got a few extras, and now I've got something that when I make my eyelets, I know how big to make my eyelets, because nice. Mistakes were made, but that's fine. But so that is what I've been working on. And my workbench was behind me. The ironing board is been more my workbench this week. I went and looked out my workbench to grab the laptop, and I was like, yeah, that's in desperate need of a clean, because anything that's like, needs to go out to the shed, on the workbench. That needs to go out to the shed, on the workbench. Like, haven't even been out there for a week. I've been busy. Well, apart from this last night. But yeah, so that is it on the medieval spam for now. I'm sure we will return to it at some point. There are a few finishing touches I need to make, and I was pretty happy overall. I got 4 costumes done pretty well. So my daughter unfortunately missed out, but it may be a year before we need them. So I'm kind of like, maybe I won't make hers yet, but I will probably start it a little bit earlier than a week to go. That was probably not the best plan. But
you're just gonna have to like send the boys to school in their outfits or something, because they ain't gonna fit them next year.
Well, worst case, the oldest will go, or the middle one will go to the youngest, and then I'll just have to make one of them again. But I think I'll fit. I did make them pretty roomy, so
I still think you should just send them to school.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll go home from that one.
Yeah, they were pretty disappointed that they weren't going. I was like, well, it is what it is, guys. We just gotta keep on trucking. So
yeah,
but yeah, so
that's the beauty of it. There'll be one next year.
Yep. If not, there'll be 1 year after. If not, there will be a one eventually. So, and next year I will have most of them done already. Hopefully, we'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see what I learn. I probably won't learn.
At the very least, you'll have yours and Miriam's done.
Yeah,
so you just work on the kid.
Yeah, but is mine done? Is it really done? Because really, my goal for a medieval festival is to have armor. So this isn't armor, but we'll see.
Like
the problem is that I'm trying to replicate more of like the early, like the 14th century, 13th century, which really means I need chainmail. And to make chainmail properly, you need riveted chainmail. So things get out of control very quickly.
I know a lady who makes chainmail. It is no joke. Like, holy moly. She was one of the folks that came to the craftsman's market that we were doing as a vendor. And so she worked on some chainmail pieces there live. And I couldn't pay attention to anything else. I was just enthralled. I was like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And she was right next to our bladesmith, Jason Anderson, who competed on and won Forged in Fire.
Oh,
I don't know if you're familiar with that show.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he won that, and he's a legit blade maker. But I was just like, I'm sorry, Jason, this is awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that I go down the path of going, well, maybe I could just, because if you go to like Lord of the Rings, they used PVC pipe, right? They got thin PVC pipe and they just sliced it on a bandsaw and then they joined it all together, right? Nice and light, spray paint it, you're good to go. Like, oh, I could do that. That'll look good. And I'm like, but it's not authentic. So then you're like, okay, well, let's make it out of metal. So then you start looking up buttered chainmail. You're like, well, that looks cool, but it's not really authentic. It's got to be riveted. So you've basically got like a rivet, a solid piece of rivet, and you basically got a rivet for every like 4 around it kind of thing. And then you start looking up like, oh, maybe if I just bought it, and then you're like, yeah, I can't afford that. So then you're like, well, how do you make it? And so like when people make the buttered mail, they'll get a piece of tube, whatever size they want, and they'll get a piece of wire, the gauge they want, and they'll basically make a spring along it. Then they'll go along and they'll chop it into all little rings, and then they'll butt it. Well, if you want to make riveted chainmail, you've got to then take that again, and then you've got to hammer the ends flat, and then you've got to punch a hole in it, and then you've got to actually rivet it together. So yeah, it's kind of one of those holy grail of like, one day when I don't have time to care about, I can just slowly work on that. But what I've probably more envisioned doing is buying like a bunch of just rings that haven't been riveted yet, and then go from there, because then it's like all you've got is the putting it together, not the making, which makes a lot more sense. But anyway,
I also am a big proponent of the often overlooked armor, in my opinion, which is scale mail. that's a really interesting process as well.
Yep.
I mean, all of them I think are intensely interesting. I've watched a couple documentaries and some other videos and stuff on folks making authentic plate armor, which is just, I mean, there's so much that you don't realize goes into it in the planning and the process of it, and making it actually usable. It's nuts. Like this, one of the documentaries I watched, this guy was making a piece for the I think it was a museum in Spain, if I remember correctly. And they were putting it next to pieces of armor that they had found. So he was recreating what it would have looked like. And so he made the whole thing, and like the gauntlets alone, which are like the hand glove pieces. Those were like 2 months of work for one gauntlet. But he put it on. He was like, a lot of people think it was really cumbersome and, heavy and hard to move. He's like, but think about it. Would you want something like that if you're in battle? So he puts this gauntlet on and shows the dexterity that he has with this gauntlet on. And he was picking up, I think it was buttons, if I remember correctly, he had on the bench, and he's picking up buttons with this gauntlet on, like no problem. It's just, wow, absolutely amazing.
There's a video of a guy on YouTube, and he's like doing flips, and he's like, in armor, full armor. And he's basically like, like obviously you are encumbered, but you're not anywhere near as encumbered. I actually, before I even started all this, about, I don't know how many years ago now, I actually started working on a gambeson, which is kind of like a padded armor to go. And this is more of a doublet to go underneath armor, as part of another costume that I never finished. But this was all completely hand sewn. And you can see I've got some of the quilting done on it, but not all of it. But so that was an unfinished project of hand sewing that may one day eventually go under some armor, but we shall see. So, Chili, if people want to find more about you, where can we go?
You can check out my website, orwoodsolutions.com, or find me on Facebook, Orwood Solutions, or Instagram at OrwoodCS. How about you?
I am on the YouTubes under craftybeetroot.com, and now that medieval land is almost over, I am hoping to get some time back on videos, but the backlog of projects is probably not going to let that happen for a while, but that's just how it is. You can find me at craftybeetroot.com, my website, where I've got a bunch of builds. I might put up a blog post or two. It's been a while, and this is probably more appropriate for blog posting stuff since I've got lots of pictures of this project. And then if you're interested in the podcast, you find us at What's on Your Workbench .podbean.com, and we are on YouTube under the same name. You can find us at Spotify, iTunes, any of the regular podcasting areas. I got spam in my email yesterday saying congratulations on 25 episodes. Do you want some help doing this? And I'm like, I don't think you've actually listened to my podcast, because we only have like 12 episodes online at the moment. So, but that's always a good sign when you start getting the spam, that somebody's starting to pay attention. So I was pretty excited about that. But so we will, I'm not sure what I'll be working on next week. I've got a couple ideas. It's school holidays for us at the moment with the kids, so keeping them entertained in lockdown is fun. So it might be something related to that. And I think I have a feeling I know what you'll be working on next week.
Yep.
All right. Well, with that, we will.
Till we meet again next week and find out what's on your workbench.